Okay, well, I think that we're just glad for the opportunity to kind of check in on how negotiations might be going. Particularly, we're just kind of wondering what that process is looking like so far, and if we can get any other benchmarks or any other kind of substance from what might be coming out of that. Obviously, I know it's still all preliminary. So I guess just to start off, how frequently have you been meeting with the Department of Justice since we last spoke?
We talk to them all the time.
Okay.
We met with some of their people this morning, as well as some community leaders about their ideas for an input for any eventual agreement. We met with the DOJ last week to talk about the framework and the process and the time frame for how our crafting of an agreement would take place.
Okay, and is there anything that you can tell us about what came out of that in terms of what might?
These processes do take some time. It's not, a findings letter from the Department of Justice isn't self-enacting. So the things they put in their findings letter and the recommendations they make are then the topics really for discussion between the Civil Rights Division and the community that's affected. And if Albuquerque's negotiations and our crafting of an agreement looks like similar cities, it'll take several months before we have something in place.
Okay, just in terms of looking at what the agreement will actually contain, or what the court enforceable agreement will actually include.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and the basis of that is in the DOJ findings letter. The last pages of that have 40+ recommendations, and I've been told by Scott and others that will be the basis point to start crafting a solution both for the police department and for the community. But in the meantime, we're not waiting. We've done several things in the last week or so that I think people will recognize as being aggressive policies that we've put into place. Number one would be the CIT training for 100% of officers. I think we'll be the only department in the country when that process is completed to have 100% of our field services bureau, those who normally take calls for service, trained. This morning in your paper, there was an article about Chief Eden changing the personal handgun policy, or the personal weapon policy at APD. That's a bold move on his part, and these are things that Chief Eden thinks are important. There's things that I think are important as a mayor that we'll be putting forward over the next days, weeks, even before the DOJ agreement has been crafted. So people should expect more of these policy changes. But we also want to make sure that we wait for the DOJ to come through with their recommendations, which we hope will be, they are forthcoming, we know they will be, before we craft the final solutions, because we don't want to implement anything that will be counteracted by the ultimate agreement. But people can expect aggressive reforms and accountability measures and things that we think will move the department and the community forward. Also, in the meantime, we've had several meetings. I personally have been in several meetings in the past 2 weeks where we've been working with the DOJ's Community Relations Service. We've brought police officers in with community activists to have discussions about what both groups would like to see in the agreement, because I think it's important as a mayor that we have the community's voice at the table to tell us, as we send our team in to craft this agreement, the issues that are most important to them. We had another meeting this morning with 18 to 20 of those in the community that have been really on the forefront of trying to drive reform at the Albuquerque Police Department from the community standpoint. And we scheduled an hour, and we ended up having a 2.5 hour meeting that was just, for me, very useful. It was a very meaningful meeting, a lot of candid dialogue, talking about issues that have been around in the city for decades in many cases, but also things that we can do today to make a positive impact. So it was an excellent meeting, and I had both Scott and Tom Streicher there at the meeting, so that we can take that input, and when our team goes to the table to work with the DOJ, we have many, many different points of view from a community-wide standpoint. There'll be more of those meetings coming with diverse groups of folks over the coming weeks.
Do you feel like you've heard anything from the community today that you hadn't been hearing in the past?
Yes. I mean, there's always things that you can learn. We had people in the room today whose family members have been involved in officer-involved shootings. We had people in the room ACLU was in the room today. And I don't want to say who, all the individuals, because I don't know if they would want that publicized. But people who you've seen at council meetings, people that you've seen around the community, and a lot of it really comes down to wanting things to happen sooner than later, which I agree as a mayor is important, but also just building these community relationships so that as time goes forward, we can have a sustainable process that isn't just centered on the DOJ agreement and the subsequent lawsuit that will follow and how that whole system works, but really a process in place so that years from now, decades from now, long after I'm the mayor of Albuquerque, we'll have a process in place to have better dialogues. And people want to be heard, and and I think they also want to engage more with the folks that are out there serving them. And this is what I saw last week when we had the meeting with police officers and community members in the same room, where community members can ask the officers and the command staff tough questions. They can get straightforward answers from the department. Both, whether they agree on every issue or not, both parties walk away with a better understanding of the other's concerns, questions, and it really made a meaningful difference. So,
in fact, one of the things that came up, one of the items that came up at the meeting this morning was members of the community saying how rewarding those meetings were, because instead of seeing the officers as officers, they saw them as real human beings. They got to see the emotional response from the officers, and they felt that was very rewarding to them personally, and that it was very rewarding to the community as a whole. That's critically important.
And when officers have an opportunity to talk to individuals whose families have been impacted through use of force incidents, whether it's deadly force or non-lethal force, I can just see that the officers gain a much better understanding there as well. Today's meeting, I called the meeting, it was hosted by the Department of Justice, and it was all community activists, no officers in the room today. But last week's meeting, we had more officers than community activists actually in the room, so we've had both sides of it. But I'm convinced as a mayor that to get where we want to go as a community here, and to get the department where we want it to be, we get the relationship between the department and the community where it needs to be, that we have to have the folks that serve in the room with the folks they serve, and to have them hear each other's questions, concerns, like I said earlier, and it's pretty powerful, and you see that happening, and that's very encouraging to me as a mayor.
So, this meeting with officers happened last week. Did it include generally some of the same people who
Yes.
were at the Monday night city council meeting?
Some of the folks that were, I don't know if they were Monday night's meeting or not, but yeah, these are folks that have been active and vocal members of our community,
Okay.
sure.
Are you concerned that despite that type of meeting that you're still, you're seeing an escalation in the type of rhetoric, and at the meeting yesterday, for example, said that a certain number of people were escorted out. There was the takeover of the city council meeting on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
What steps are you going to take? I know that you're having these community meetings, but are you concerned that there is an escalating amount of criticism by those in the community at the moment?
This is not actually.
Some of that I think is to be expected, because people are upset, and obviously some people in the community tend to act out a bit more than other people do. The true goal here, and the realization is going to be, is that the more this dialogue opens up and the more frank it becomes, the greater the understanding between the parties, the greater that understanding develops between the parties, the better the relationships are going to be, and the more that is going to get solved. The dialogue is certainly a starting point for all of this, because we have to know what other people think, and we have to know what other people feel. If you don't know that, you're simply operating in a vacuum. You're not nearly as effective as you can be. But if you do listen to people, and you do act upon the requests and the suggestions and the recommendations of other people, then you tend to begin to provide better customer service, and that's what this is all about in policing. It's all about customer service. This is not about law enforcement. This is about customer service. That's critical, and it's important for people to understand that should be the number one goal of the agency.
So
the process that I'm putting together, not all of which has been made public. I'm working on, at this point, it will be soon. I'm working on a series of community policing councils that we'll be talking about over the next several weeks that we'll put throughout the city on an ongoing basis to get citizens and police officers at the table talking about important issues both to the department and the community. We're also setting up a series of meetings today, of which was one of the first, where we met with community activists, those who have been working with the DOJ for the past 2 years or more, to talk about and just to listen, quite frankly, to their concerns and to answer questions for them about where we're moving and how we're going about this. But we're going to meet with police officers and their families. I think it's important we get their families in the room as well, so we'll have another meeting for that. We'll be meeting with the business community. We'll be meeting with other interested parties throughout the community in a way to foster a dialogue that produces ideas. And people are concerned, people are angry. I understand that as a mayor, and that is not something that it should be seen as unusual. But I also want to set up a series of meetings where we can actually turn it into thoughtful, meaningful dialogue and really look for answers and look for specific examples of things that we can do. And I imagine we got 15 to 20 of those today, plus some additional written ones. Will all of those be in the ultimate agreement? Probably not every single one of them. Most of them, I would imagine, have a great opportunity to be part of the final agreement. But we have different groups in the community that are looking at this from different angles, and we want to make sure that we're hearing everybody, so that as my team goes in, Scott being the lead person to go in and craft this agreement as our special counsel, that he and myself, Chief Eden, Chief Streicher, and others have heard from a broad base of the community, so that as we craft this and we go in, we have all of that input.
And that's really important. That's critically important, because police community relations in Albuquerque isn't just about an eventual agreement with the Department of Justice. It's not just about making technical reforms or changes to written policies or forms or procedures. It's really about transforming the relationship between the residents of Albuquerque, all the people who are stakeholders in the success of not just the police department, but the city, transforming that relationship between them and the government of Albuquerque, the police department, the administration, the elected representatives in city council, and others. And it's fixing that piece of it that is, candidly, it's harder, but it's more important, and it takes a lot more work over this process. I want to emphasize too, though, that this is a process. It isn't an event. This happens in other places. You get a findings letter. You don't then have an agreement, and then everything is magically changed and fixed. It will take time to implement here, just as in every other place.
And how many do they have going now? 8?
They've got 8 what they call consent decrees right now. There are memorandums of understanding or agreement with other cities, and then there's another process with the DOJ through a different office called the COPS office, where they do technical assistance, and they call it a collaborative process, and it's modeled after the one that we did in Cincinnati a dozen years ago. So a number of communities are going through this, and what I think the people of Albuquerque can expect is you will see continuous improvement in policing, delivery of police services, continuous improvement in a change in police community relations, and really continuous improvement throughout the lifespan of any eventual agreement.
So, based on your experience in other cities, does it generally work better that you do make some changes in the way that in the couple that we've seen so far in terms of personal weapons and the changing of the use of force policy?
I think that helps build confidence in the community.
Okay. Can you give us an idea?
When the agency takes the initiative to make some adjustments that they can make without oversight or without the necessity of having approval of a consent decree or the Justice Department or anybody else, it's critically important to help build that confidence with simple changes, sometimes simple changes, other times very dramatic changes inside the agency. And as you saw this morning, with Chief Eden making a decision about changing the agency's policy on personally owned firearms. That is a major step in policing, in altering the way policing is done here in Albuquerque. And it is a step that was much appreciated by the people we met with this morning, quite frankly. They praised it. They praised Chief Eden, they praised the decision that he made and the action that he took. This is the type of thing that builds confidence that the process is working and will continue to work.
We've made a recommendation to the city on a series of those types of things that the mayor and the department can enact on their own without needing to wait for an eventual agreement, precisely to build trust and confidence and to demonstrate the commitment of the city and the administration to making policing in Albuquerque fully constitutional as well as effective.
Can you give us a few more examples of what might be done?
Well, there are some other things that we've talked about, and I'll let the mayor
Sure.
and the chief roll those out.
Well, yeah, we'll be having a series of announcements over the next week or two about some of these changes. They'll involve policies with lapel cameras. They will involve training. They will involve accountability measures. There's a number of them that have been working on fairly consistently since April 10th when the DOJ findings came out, but really some of them even since Chief Eden walked in the door. There's some things that he's been working on for the past several months that take some time because you have to, when you're crafting policy for a police department, you obviously want to have some urgency there, and I can tell you without a doubt there's a lot of urgency involved here, which is a good thing, but you also need to make sure that you're putting solutions and policies in place that have proven track records of working elsewhere so that you're not underswinging or overswinging on a policy. And so if there's one thing that we are doing is being thoughtful about how that works. One of the sentiments in the meeting this morning and one of the things we've heard from the community on a regular basis is that sense of urgency. Okay, the report came out on April 10th. When are we going to see something? As Scott said, this process to get the agreement in place could take months. But in the meantime, let's take those actions that we can to number one, do the things that the Chief Eden thinks need to be done, that I obviously agree with, but then also making the DOJ aware of those, making the community aware of those, and then, as importantly, making the department aware of those, the rank and file officers, so that they can, they can put these into effect on their day-to-day activities. And that's a big part of this. When these changes come through, we have to make a concerted effort to inform our officers, not just in the police academy, but those who have been on the, working for their community for 15, 18, 20, 25 years in some cases, about these changes so that we have a uniformity of implementation. For example, it's one of the things that the DOJ says in their report. Besides what they say in the report, we know that we're one of the only departments, if not the only department in the country, that has the widespread use of lapel cameras like we have here. As I talk to people in the community, it surprises them to find out that most police departments don't use lapel cameras. That most departments of our size certainly don't have them in places, as widespread as we do. Well, that's good news. And that was something we implemented in my first term as mayor. What the DOJ report does say, though, is yes, it's a best practice, it's a good idea, I'm paraphrasing the report, but it was implemented poorly. It didn't get to buy-in from the rank and file. It was done in a way that wasn't as seamless as it needed to be. Part of that's the fact that we are on the very cutting edge of transparency in policing. Part of it is technology, where I think we have 3 different lapel camera systems now in the department. We have some of the older cameras, some of the newer cameras. There's new technology coming through all the time. But we need to now take this, which is a good idea for lots of reasons, and put new policies in place about how do you use them, what happens if you don't, what are the disciplinary actions, so it's very clear cut both for the community to understand and our officers to understand, so that it becomes less subjective. And this will be an important part of all of these policies as we craft them, is putting the accountability measures in there so there's not a lot of misunderstanding about what should be done and what happens if you do or don't, if you choose to, what's the word I'm looking for? Purposefully, comply or non-comply.
Okay, so is it fair to say that we're going to be seeing a change soon to the lapel camera policies?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, soon being a, I don't want to,
Doesn't
say
mean tomorrow.
1 week
Doesn't
from
mean
Tuesday,
tomorrow.
but we are working on this, on changes in the lapel camera policy, absolutely.
And then a question for you both. Have you seen this? Can you compare this to any other city in your experience where after the Department of Justice report, that there have been continued officer-involved shootings, regardless of the circumstances
Sure.
behind them?
Sure, you're going to still
It
see them.
happens.
Yeah.
You're always going to see them. It's unfortunate, but sometimes people pull weapons on officers. That's unfortunate. And in all American police agencies, officers are trained to respond to threats like that in one way only. One way only. So until that problem disappears, there will always be officer-involved shootings across the United States. It's not going to go away. But what we do know is that in cities that have gone through this process, they can manage the process in ways so that their officers use force more intelligently, use it less frequently, transition to other types of models and how they interact with people. And in those jurisdictions, you can see reductions in use of force and use of deadly force.
Part
And
of that
that's the
is
goal.
simply employing tactics that help to de-escalate a situation, so that when the situation is becoming tense and it seems to be becoming more disruptive or becomes more engaging, there are tactics that officers can employ where they actually de-emphasize the need to use force and switch to another tactic, or perhaps another officer takes over that's trained in a different fashion, and that can help to resolve situations without officers having to resort to the use of force. These are all the different things that are possible for police agencies to do. Then again, it doesn't eradicate the fact that there may be a difficult situation occur. And when that does occur, what is very important is that an agency take those situations and start to break them apart, sort of in a case history method, to take a look at how are we prepared for a situation like this before it occurred, what actually occurred during the situation, and then afterwards, what can we draw out of it, and lessons that will help us to possibly alleviate the need to repeat this type of activity in the future and incorporate that into every facet of training within the agency. That's what's critically important about evaluating these situations. How well did we do, and how can we do better?
And how can we keep officers out of situations in the future where maybe we have an example of a situation where you could have done something slightly differently, and then the officer wouldn't have found themselves in a situation. But one of the things I heard this morning, for example, in our meeting, one of the local service providers, for homeless services in our community, does very important work. And this individual talks about when the police come by their shelter, if you will, 4 or 5 times a month to deal with someone who was, been engaging in illegal activity of some kind or the other. When a CIT trained officer shows up, a lot of times it's a different reaction than when a non-CIT trained officer shows up. Well, we know that at 27% of our force being currently trained in CIT, that's probably a fairly high number for a police department in the
very
country.
high.
People here think, well, gosh, isn't everybody always trained everywhere? Well, the short answer is no. But, and that's why when we get to 100%, we will be the only department. We'll be definitely a national leader in that. But today, for me, one of the things you talked about earlier, did you hear anything interesting or new in the meeting? That was one of them. It was verification to me as a mayor that we're doing absolutely the right thing with this CIT training, because this individual provider sees the difference. He says, look, both officers that show up, the CIT trained officer and the non-CIT trained officer, are both good individuals. I'm paraphrasing. But the one that CIT trained just handles the individual differently in their relationship on scene than the person that's not. So I think it was good to hear that, and it's one of those things where kind of gets 1 or 2 media cycles and people forget about it sometimes, but it's an ongoing, meaningful thing that will be a fundamental opportunity for us to change outcomes in the community.
And that's really huge, because it also goes to officer safety. I mean, as APD transitions, implements reforms, de-escalating, changing tactics, assessing practices and protocols for how they deal with a huge range of people, all of those things also enhance officer safety. So the less frequently that officers are ever put in a position where they may have to make that ultimate judgment as to use deadly force, the less frequently that occurs, the better it is for the community, the better it is for officer safety.
And the best way to accomplish that is by providing the very best training that's available out there. So that, as the mayor talked about, 2 officers showing up, one has specialized training and has developed different skills from an officer who hasn't received that training. It makes it even more critically important that the agency does provide this training to 100% of the officers. You don't want different responses from the same police agency because of a disparity in training. You want everyone to have that. And quite frankly, if we're going to ask officers to go out into the field and address extremely difficult situations under very tense conditions, then they deserve to have that training, and they deserve the opportunity to help themselves develop the skills that will help them address these situations as they occur and as they evolve. And sometimes they evolve extraordinarily quick.
And so what used to be specialized training, and what will continue to be specialized training around the country for some departments, will become the norm here. Then we can get ourselves in the position we want to be, which is a national leader in these types of policies. The other thing that was interesting in our meeting last week, where we had police officers and the community together, it gives people an opportunity to ask each other difficult questions. We had an individual last week ask one of our police officers, why do you shoot to kill? And I don't even know the officer's name that answered, but the officer went through a very thoughtful and detailed discussion about the fact that Albuquerque police officers don't shoot to kill. They shoot to stop action. What does that mean? Why can't you shoot the gun out of their hand? Why can't you do this? Well, they went through a detailed explanation of what they do to stop the action or stop the threat. And I'm not a police professional, but it was very interesting to watch, because the citizen got a chance to ask a difficult question. The police officer got a chance to give a thoughtful answer. They may not have walked away with complete agreement on the circumstance, but they both understood each other a little bit better than they did when they started, and that is going to be the key. And I'm becoming more and more convinced as a mayor that yes, as a mayor, I'm on the front. It's my job to be on the front of this leadership from the standpoint of bringing the community together, working with the DOJ, crafting these solutions, allowing the public safety professionals to do their job, but also. It's not going to happen with just elected officials in a room. I saw such a meaningful dialogue between our community and our officers, and that's going to be the foundation of what we set up moving forward. And one of the DOJ facilitators that was there last week, he wrote. We went around the room and we talked about. Let's just put keywords on the whiteboard. Well, the first keyword that came up was respect. And Scott tells me that in Cincinnati, when they surveyed their community in Cincinnati in the early 2000s, that the 2 groups of individuals that had the most in common with what they wanted were actually the people that had been protesting the police department. Those were the most critical concerns. And the officers themselves had the most, and it was interesting, I saw that last week here. They both wanted respect. The officers obviously want respect from the community wants respect from the officers. It was fantastic to listen to them talk about that. But then the facilitator from the DOJ wrote another word. He said, I don't want you to forget this word. And he wrote expectations on the board. He said, so much of this has to do with expectations, and this process is not going to be just about putting lawyers in a room and having them craft an agreement between the city and the department and the DOJ. That's a big part of it, but if we don't have the community buy-in, if we don't set expectations, like Scott just said, if certain things happen in certain situations, there's only one response that people can, that an officer can have. But how can we avoid those kinds of circumstances as many times as possible? But how can we also, we even had a discussion about, traffic stops. When the DOJ said, ask people in the room, what do you do when you get stopped by a police officer for traffic stop? Who knows what you're supposed to do? And you'd be surprised how many people in the room didn't know the answer. I didn't know the answer at the time. And the DOJ person went on to say, look, you stop, you turn your car off, roll down all of your windows, put your hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, wait for the officer to approach the car. It's okay to say sir, ma'am. It's okay for the officer to say sir, ma'am. It's okay to have a mutual respect, obviously there, and things go much better. Well, there's an insurance company. I think Allstate Insurance has a program nationally to educate people on something as simple as that. So it's much broader. This is a much broader discussion than just what the policies, the dry work of putting together policies and procedures. They're incredibly important, but it's this community dialogue. I keep going back to it and back to it and back to it, and it's just when I've seen it take place, where it's not just one group of individuals, but multiple groups getting together, makes a big difference.
And we think, Albuquerque is a large city. It's a large city, it's a very diverse city, it's rich in diversity, and it's very, very critically important that when we put together an agreement, it is reflective of the values and the goals of the people of Albuquerque. That it's not a template or a cookie cutter, and it's not something that just the lawyers could sit in the room and figure out amongst ourselves. It needs to be narrowly tailored to address the issues that are of concern, the technical issues, and then we can do things that are broader. And that really falls not just to the city administration, but to the overall community. And I think in the weeks and months ahead, the people of Albuquerque can look forward to being asked very directly to partner with the city government and partner with the administration and partner with the rest of the community in making policing better and in moving the city forward.
And as a mayor, I'm fully committed to this process. The administration's fully committed to the process. Chief Eaton's fully committed to the process. But we need the community fully committed to the process. And the good news is I see that. And we're seeing more, we're seeing a turn from an understandable anger from some in our community because of effects on their families, on individuals they know, or just their passion in general. And then I fully understand that as a mayor, and we're starting to see that now evolve into these dialogues that we're starting to have where we actually have people coming to the meetings with lists of their ideas. What would you like to see on the Police Oversight Commission what would you like to see the City Council do on the Police Oversight Commission? What would you like to see the Chief do in this regard in the department? How would you like to see the monitoring take place? What specific policies do you think are most meaningful to you? Knowing that, like you saw today, even in your newspaper, a policy that today was popular, obviously, with advocates in the community, was unpopular with the police union. Okay? We're going to have policies where members of the community don't think it goes far enough, and the officers think it went too far, for example. That's just going to be part of the process, and I understand that as a mayor, but we're going to be thoughtful, we're going to listen. I doubt if I spoke for 10 minutes out of a 2.5-hour meeting today. We were there to listen to individuals, and then bring that back, and then craft solutions, knowing that we won't all agree on everything, but we'll have a much better and broader understanding if we have the whole community engaged. So that full commitment needs to be there on all parts, and I can certainly assure people it's there on mine.
And the good news is it's achievable. It's achievable. It's not a remote possibility. There's a process in place that works. The process in place that works is one that we used a dozen years ago in Cincinnati, and the DOJ has used it in other communities through their COPS office. It really does require doing the hard work of engaging the community on all of these issues so that everyone is engaged and invested in the success, not just of the reforms, but the success of the city. And if the community really puts its nose to the ground here, to the grindstone, this is extremely, this is not just likely, this is going to happen.
What will happen is, as success is realized, that'll start to gain momentum, and people will become excited about not just what we can accomplish, but where we can wind up being, which is well beyond what the goals are of DOJ reforms here. This becomes very expansive, and it becomes contagious, if you will, not just within city employment, but throughout the entire community. It really does generate a tremendous amount of energy and collaboration between the city itself and everyone who's a stakeholder here in Albuquerque, and quite frankly, it will probably transcend beyond Albuquerque into the entire region. Because let's face it, the city of Albuquerque is what drives this entire region of the country.
And that's one of the first things I talked to both Scott and Chief Streicher about, is this idea that we can the work with the DOJ will be dictated by the DOJ. I mean, it'll be driven by them, and as it should be. But I want to go much broader than that. I want to create a system that will be in place long after I'm the mayor of the city of Albuquerque, that the next mayor can pick up and run with, and so that we don't have the discussion like we had this morning, which was very much everybody in the room appeared to be, well, almost everybody, I don't want to say that everybody because I don't know, I didn't take a vote on it, but most people in the room seem to agree that these problems and issues have been around for decades, not just years, but decades. Well, you know, they flared up in the 1970s, they flared up in the 80s, they flared up in the 90s, they flared up twice in the 2000s, they flared up my first year in office. How can we make a concerted effort to put systems into place and create a new norm in the community about how we have these relationships, so it's not just a cookie cutter recipe, but something that the community really buys into and can pass on from generation to generation. Generation of officer to the next generation of officer, generation of community members to the next generation of community members. And that is a hard thing to do. And only time will tell if we get there. But I can guarantee you, we're not going to get there just between the administration and the DOJ. We're going to get there between the community and the police department themselves. And as Scott said, one of the best things I've heard, one of the good news things that I've heard is, unlike some other cities that have been through this, the DOJ findings weren't centered on corruption. They weren't centered on generational things. They were centered on policies and procedures. And if folks read that DOJ report, they'll see those, and some people say, well, gosh, that looks pretty dry. You're talking about policies, procedures, and training. Well, exactly. Mm-hmm. But then also setting up the community relationships will drive the things that you can't even necessarily measure, which is just how are officers and the community members interacting, even in areas that have distrust today.
It will feel better. Albuquerque itself will feel better.
But it's the thing that we have to caution about right now as a community is this is going to take some time. People today wanted to know, why it's taking so long, even after the report came out. Well, it's going to take several months to do that. It does everywhere. We're putting meaningful things in place. CIT training, the handgun policy today by Chief Eden. Those will be things we can do in the meantime. And I know I'm covering some ground that I covered a little bit earlier, but the fact is, it will take time, and it's important, I think, for all of us to understand that as critical as this is, and as long-term of a process as this needs to be, is we have to be thoughtful on the front end. If we underswing, it won't be effective. If we overswing, it won't be effective. There's communities that have been involved in this for decades because they didn't craft the right kind of agreements on the front end, and we just don't want to be in that place. And so I think I have a balanced team put together from a really diverse background. We're engaging the community. We're engaging those who have grave concerns about the department. We're engaging those who want to see the community succeed in ways far beyond just policing, which is also what we talked about this morning. A lot of this morning's discussions were about disparities, national discussions about equity and things like that. So we have a great opportunity here, but we just need people to not be patient. We want them to be urgent, but just know that it will take us some time. But let's do this together, and let's and then also know that we're going to make some decisions as a community, as a department, that aren't going to get where it needs to go. Some will, some won't. So let's be agile and pivot off of that and move in a different direction if we need to. We won't know until we implement them and start moving forward, and then we have to build expectations in our community and get some kind of a community sense of when will we know. What's it going to look like when we know we've made progress? Certainly, lowering the number of officer-involved shootings. Some of these are statistical things, but other things are just based on surveys in the community. How's your relationship with the department compared to 2 years ago, compared to last year? What are your experiences? And we talked about that a lot this morning as well. So it's a big concept, but I just have all the faith and confidence in our community based on what I've seen in these meetings that we've held in the last couple of weeks, more of which will be forthcoming to have this important dialogue.
And this is critically important work for the future of the city of Albuquerque and the people who live here. So it is important to do it right. It is more important to do it right than to do it immediately. But we need to have that fierce urgency that in which the community continues to engage in this dialogue so that when we're finished putting the packages together, implementation will be smooth, and implementation will make it clear that things are changing. 5 years from now, 7 years from now, in Albuquerque, I expect to see a very different place than we're in today. That's what we've seen in many other cities.
I know you guys are all very passionate about this topic, but we have to get through it.
I know we got, sorry about that.
I think that's covered all the bases I had.
Great.
So.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, Patrick.
Appreciate your time.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.